you could introduce yourself and perhaps tell us a little bit about Hello Sunshine.
Right. Thank you. Well, I'm Sarah, as you know. The current CEO of Hello Sunshine. I started the company with Reese, so I've been here since inception, and we've built the company together. I think we are a mission-driven company. Our mission is to change the narrative for women, and when we talk about that, it's, we've got some driving beliefs that underpin our mission. One is that culture can shift storytelling, or storytelling can shift culture, I should say, and those things are intimately linked. And it's very hard to change the way women get to walk through the world without shifting that culture, as well as a whole lot of systems along the way. But that's what we're built around. And, we call ourselves a media brand. A lot of people describe us as a production company, but when we set out to build the company, I guess 6 or 7 years ago now, Reese and I looked ahead and said, what is the company? What is a media company of the next 10 to 20 years? How should it be architected? Not a media company that looks like one that was built in the last 10 to 20 years. And it's very different. And so we've got some driving thoughts around how we built the company. One is that you've got to have a relationship directly with your consumers. It's not enough to just make content in a noisy world. You have to take ownership of audiences showing up for that content, even if you're distributing the content with a streamer or someone else. And you've got to build brand as a signal for trust and cut through and quality. And so, yeah, that's what I do every day. I'll say I'm a mother of 3 as well. I'm Australian by birth. I've lived and worked in the US for about 25 years. I had 5 or 6 years in Hong Kong in the middle of that, working for News Corp as well. So I've lived all over the place, but LA is now home, and our office, we have about 150 people. Our largest office is in LA. We have offices now in New York, London, and Nashville. Our second largest office is actually Nashville. We have about 35 people in Nashville now. So yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell.
Amazing. Thank you. Quick question. And for those of you, I imagine you all know that she's talking about Reese Witherspoon, but I just wanted to mention the last name just in case. But how did you meet Reese?
I was running, and the sort of through line around, I was working as president of Otter Media, which was a joint venture set up by the Chernin Group, which I'd been working with for a number of, to invest in like direct to consumer media brands. So we'd bought a company called Crunchyroll. We had Rooster Teeth and Fullscreen, and I was building that venture, which it wasn't a fund in the sense that we had all of our investments, we had majority control over, but they were all founder led. And so Reese came in to meet us. She had this idea. She'd done a bunch of content when she was doing Draper James, which is separate to Hello Sunshine. She'd done some storytelling around the brand and the jeans factory in Georgia. And she was early onto Instagram, and she was frustrated as a producer as well. And she had a really successful production shingle with another great Australian woman, Bruna Papandreou, is a friend of mine, but and they'd done Gone Girl and Wild, but she really looked ahead and said, I want to leave this business better than how I found it. And I think there's an opportunity. I don't want to be just telling a few stories a year, like one film and one TV show. Like I see all this talent, and how do I want to build, we talked, the shorthand was like, and this was the time 7 years ago, I was saying the Vice for women, the Vice for comedy, but it was like the Vice for women was the shorthand. And when we really unpacked what that meant, we started to talk about the mission and the vision, and the fact that it's important to build not just sort of this history in Hollywood. You built your film and TV company and then all the digital assets in one. And we talked about the importance of, if you're going to do that, you have to build everything under the single hood, under the brand, because if you're going to sit with a creator, some things are better off as a podcast, some things are a feature film, some are a social series, right? And it's like, I want to give more opportunities to more women, to great creative voices. She talks about the motivation of feeling like we've got decades of lost stories from women and people of color too, that have just been structurally excluded and marginalized from Hollywood. So long term, coming back to that, I was running Otter, and she came in she had this idea. I was looking for an investor. So when we first started the company, I was her board member, and we had some other big companies we were building. There's only 2, we were the only shareholder, and with Reese and her investment partners, her husband, Jim, and another really great person, Seth Rudsky. And so we started that company together. And then, I said, I know the first 5 or 10 people we need to hire for this as we operationalize it. And I had a big job running Otter, but one thing led to another. As we're building the company in the first few months, we're actually in the process of selling Otter to AT&T Warner Media, which no one knew, but the timing just worked out that, I had the experience of also working with Reese over those 6 months and hiring the first executives and feeling, I remember driving to my little Hello Sunshine WeWork off. It wasn't a WeWork, but it was like a small, like borrowed office of 8 people. And I had this very big job on the one hand, driving to my office where I was managing we were selling Otter. We sold that eventually for like $1.5 billion. And I had lawyers and attorneys and tax people. And I loved my job. I mean, I had the greatest job in the world at Otter. But I remember driving to the office at Hello Sunshine, noticing my energy, just going, wow, like I was sort of splitting my day being the acting CEO of Hello Sunshine while we were building the team and then running Otter. And it just was a very natural transition. And in the end, we were selling Otter, and it was actually gave me a moment that was a good and responsible moment to step out of Otter and step full-time into Hello Sunshine.
Well, that's a very good segue into the next question, which is, how did all of your previous roles prepare you for this current role at Hello Sunshine? And if you could kind of describe some of those roles for us, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things when you're prepared, right? I always say this was exactly the right thing at the right time in my career. Like if Hello Sunshine had come up 5 years before, it still would have been just as incredible opportunity, but I don't think I was quite ready. I mean, maybe, and part of that was, I think one was where, like right out of business school. So I graduated business school I came to the US to go to business school on an Australian government scholarship in 97. I graduated in 99. I started a company with a couple of guys from MIT at the intersection of entertainment and technology. And the through line for me has always been curious about, I love the entertainment media business. I had a business head on. I was like, I'm not a writer. I never even saw producing as an option for me. Like I didn't. So I'm just going to come up on the business side, and I love building things. And so I've always been at that nexus. And so the through line there is different. Like Ascent Media was a big media operations company, but it was like the back end of media management, media delivery, all the cost side of media. And we owned a bunch of post houses. But I had a role, like a growth role within Ascent, trying to carve out new businesses. I bought and sold companies in Singapore and in the UK. And then I ended up at Fox for many years in between that, but in business development, and, worked on Hulu. Chernin Group, Peter Chernin was the CEO at Fox or the COO at Fox when I was there. So I ended up going to work for him, again, building next generation media brands and businesses as an entrepreneur. Chernin Group also had a big film presence at film producers. So I feel like I was in the zone. And what I've been doing the last 10 years was really trying to look ahead and build brands at the intersection of entertainment, what was happening on technology and direct to consumer. And so that's been the through line. And all of that, both the work I did as at Fox, I was in business development and M&A. So just understanding the economics. I mean, I think I really understand the business models of media and like the guts of how you make money. And that's really shifted. Like the streaming, it's a different business than these 10 years, the last 5 or 6 years versus it was before that. Working with kind of modern media brands, right? So I talk about, Facebook's a media company, and it's really different. Even the direct consumer media business is really different. Even, all those businesses were built on Facebook 10 years ago. Like everything that was valued and built right now, I mean, they're built on Instagram and TikTok and direct, right? And built on Substack as much as anything, right? So I feel like both that, and then I would say my temperament, right? In the sense, look, I went in on my profile, I love learning. I mean, I moved my family to Hong Kong because I was like, I'm not an LA media executive. I didn't grow up. I have an international outlook. It was like a stretch role. I loved it. I moved to Hong Kong with News Corp. I worked for James Murdoch and another great guy, Jan Koppen, who's now at Fox. And it was massive learning curve, still in the media business though, and in business development. And I oversaw a bunch of joint ventures as well and making investments. And, I mean, it was an amazing role and having operating business reporting into me. So there's been a clear through line. I think one of the things I've always prioritized is learning and who I was working for and the profile of the work that I was doing over and above title, prestige, in some cases salary. And I always saw, like, I know I want to be in this broadly in this space, but put myself in good rooms, working on hard things, and always with entrepreneurial companies. So even though News Corp Fox was a big company, it was, I feel like that and Disney were the most entrepreneurial at the time. And so, but I got really good learning, exposure, mentorship. And it was, I was in an entrepreneurial environments that those businesses, you're getting shit done. Like there's no, it's not, I always talk about, like, I didn't want to work on science projects at companies, like strategy groups that like do a lot of reports, but never get anything done. And I didn't want to work in sales. I was like, I'm somewhere in the middle, which is like complex problems, but you're getting stuff done. But I didn't, and in the entertainment business, it's very hard to build businesses without real assets, right? So like entertainment assets, I mean, Hulu's a good example of that, working on the team where we did the first business plan for Hulu. So I think all of those prepared me. So when I sat with Reese, it was, I totally know the business you want to build. I know the profile of it. I know how we make money. I know who to hire. I had a real confidence and a vision for how I thought we had to do it. And also just, I mean, she's such an incredible leader herself and her profile. We just were very complimentary. And I also had the maturity to say, here's all the stuff I'm not good at. Like, here's the team we have to build. I'm not a producer. So, but I think I can attract and manage like world-class talent. And I also think and know that I've been in the business long enough to know that I want to build a company that all the women and men that we hire, you know, we want to build a company we would have loved to have worked at the last 20 years. And I had a pretty clear view of what that looked like, what a healthy culture looks like, what a high performance culture looks like, what an equitable culture looks like, because I'd experienced all versions of that by working in different places where I'm experienced really positives and some negatives as well, as you do in any career. So that's not a very short answer.
That's so inspiring and exciting. I would love to hear more. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but did the entrepreneurial work and the fundraising experience you had with your early venture, Linkscape, color the way you develop growth strategies now?
Absolutely. And I've always said, even when I worked in a big corporation, I got paid a salary and and a bonus and didn't have any equity. I've always been an entrepreneur. And people are like, are you an entrepreneur or do you work in a company? I'm not, no. If you are in, and I think to me, there's some growth mindsetness to about that as well, is absolutely. And I think one of the things I feel like I've learned with a little bit of experience and, one of the things when you go out and raise money, right? There's a little bit nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. You're raising money. You either are or you're not. There's no false judgment about, well, we nearly did it. Like, it doesn't really matter. And that to me is effectiveness. The job in going and raising a round is, if you set out to raise $5 million, if you raise $5 million, you're effective in that process. And there's lots of other qualities to it, or the quality of investors if you raise a good valuation. But, and it's a good kind of experience for life itself, which is you're working into inequitable rooms, you're working into rooms with structural bias, you're working into rooms of white men, you're walking into rooms, all of that exists, but you still have to play within that system to be effective. And so I think one of the things I really learned was there's always lots of explanations why you can and can't do anything. And I think part just bridging to the growth mindset too is really taking agency around, like, our company, Hello Sunshine, we assume agency in everything we do. That doesn't mean that structural inequities don't exist. It doesn't mean that all the stats suck. Like 6% directors, like it's so, and they're not getting better fast enough. It doesn't mean all of those don't exist, but we're building a company. We're assuming we have agency to solve this problem because I don't know any other way to move forward. And it's the same thing. All of that entrepreneurial experience is like, you have to own what you're responsible for and the job that you're trying to do. And the reality is then you got to problem solve when you're like, okay, like these dumbasses aren't giving us any money. I think they're dumbasses, but okay, how do we go make a pitch more effective? How do we be better? how do we control the things that we can control? And how do we stack the decks? And they're really naming so again, it's that fine line between this false optimism doesn't help you. Like, what is, and then when you don't achieve what you want, you just are like, well, the world sucks. And, it does. It's unfair. It's really unfair. It's still unfair. But you know what? If I'm setting out to raise money, I gotta work out how to navigate in this world, because I'm, as an individual, certainly not going to change it in these next 4 months that I have to raise a fund or raise my money. So I think part of it is, look, rejection, problem solving, pitching, telling a story, credibly telling a narrative, realizing you got to have the juice to back it up, right? And it's not, the biggest thing, one of the biggest things I learned from, when I was running my startup, a lot of times we were in Silicon Valley, and I've carried it through to today. People would be like, well, how's your startup going? And people would say, I got 75 people. It's going great. And I just thought that was really weird. I'm like, that just tells me how much money you're burning every month. Like, how does having 75 people, it's a false indicator of success, right? It's kind of bullshit. But that was I've raised $200 million at $1 billion pre. Okay, well, that just could be setting yourself up for a huge failure, right? And so I'm always and I call ourselves, early days of the company, it was like, should we put out a press release? We did this thing. I'm like, no, we are all, it's like more walk than talk. Like, what are the real metrics of holding ourselves accountable for being effective? What do we have control over? How do we stack the decks and set the conditions for that? And as the CEO, I'm the chief condition setter, right? And so raising money, it's like, there's you have to take 100% responsibility for being effective in that. And yet all of those other things are true, right? It's true. It's harder for women to raise money. It's true in Silicon Valley. It was also true for many years. Silicon Valley did not fund direct-to-consumer and media companies, and a lot of them still don't. And also, they're bad investors in some of those companies because they don't really understand the businesses, right? So when you go out to raise money for a direct-to-consumer company and you go to a bunch of Silicon Valley tech VCs, a lot of them, there's some really good ones that have been built in the last 5 to 6 years, but 10 years ago, no one was. Okay, what's the learning? And I think so it sort of gets to all of those entrepreneurial growth mindset skills, I think, are you got to take the learning and see the patterns and then problem solve and move on. And I learned so much on that. And I also, the deep responsibility, and I've held that responsibility very heavily at times, and I'm trying to hold it more lightly. I still hold it pretty heavily. One of the reasons I'm good at what I do, for being responsible for people's paychecks, for being responsible for people's quitting jobs and coming to a startup, has equity currency over salary. I hold that responsibility so dearly, and it makes me a good executive, but it's also you gotta be clear about what pressure at different points in your life you can hold and what responsibility you can hold, because everyone talks about entrepreneurship, all the good sides and the glory, and you get a write-up in a magazine, but it's fucking hard. You hold a lot of responsibility. And I really spend a lot of time with early stage entrepreneurs, sort of the reality check, right? Which is and I don't want to discourage anyone from it, but I also don't think it serves anyone by this, there is this sort of toxic girl boss, if you can dream it, you can do it. And it's very dangerous. And people get into situations that I'm so I always try and be very encouraging and very straightforward. And so it gave me a taste, that entrepreneur work, of how I have a deep respect for how hard it is to build anything. And I'm very clear about naming that to people. I've talked people out of coming to Hello Sunshine in the first few, especially the first couple of years of the company. I was like, they don't want to step away from there's going to be too much discomfort, as we talked about what was important to them. Some people can't handle that discomfort. And by the way, there's no judgment on that at all. People are at different phases in their lives personally. Some people can tolerate more financial risk than others. Some don't have some have 4 kids and they're shit, and they're single parents, or some have grown up. Everyone has a different personal profile. There's no judgment. in that, but being really self-aware about that. So anyway, I will try and keep my answers shorter. I know I can bang on.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Please.
So I think part of kind of what you were getting at, I heard you talking about kind of accepting what is, knowing and accepting what is in your control. And sometimes I think in a growth mindset, for me personally, something I struggle with is always thinking like, never feeling like it's enough, always being like, oh, like if I'm growing, if I'm the best version of myself, if I'm doing my best, if I'm trying my hardest, I always tend to think that there's like 1% more, that, you know what I mean? There's always that feeling of like, oh, I could have done this tiny little thing, or like, oh, I did all of this, but I could have gotten up and done that 5 a.m. workout, that kind of thing. What kind of advice do you have in terms of figuring out what it is that's actually in your control, and having that acceptance of, I guess, balancing the growth mindset and also like accepting where you are at that time?
I mean, it's such a good question. I'll tell just one very quick personal anecdote, and it bridges this. And when at Full Screen, I used to do, I remember we bought a company called McBeard, and there was like 15 women aged 20 to 35 that were about to have their first babies. And I remember George Stropholis founded Full Screen. I was like, we just bought this company. There's like all of these women that they want to have a lunch with you. I was like, why do I want to talk to them? And we had this lunch. It was the craziest, greatest. And then I started doing these lunches for just any mid-career woman. And what they wanted to talk about was the real shit around like also like those questions come up about having kids. And I remember saying this one phrase, and I was like, oh, so I'll tell you what sparked the question. But there's this, I have a child who's 16 who had a series of developmental delays when he was born, and they're pretty significant. And you get to 2 and you're doing early intervention. He wasn't walking. I mean, literally it was my second full-time job, and you get to the point, and then he's 4, and then and he's doing great. He's 16. He's my honey. I love him. And he's doing really well. But it was literally like, well, after the second round of genetic testing and then allergen, and we're on a gluten-free, dairy-free. And my husband and I looked, and I have this conversation with parents of neurotypical children all the time. There is like, nothing is ever enough. You can never give your child so much therapy. And it's a version of like, there's a version of self-knowledge. There's a version of, and so I just relate that anecdote because it really bridged me to what I'm going to say next, which is, we were talking about a version of this question was like, you want to be if you're partnered or want to be partnered, you want to go investing on finding a partner, if that's your life choice, partnered, parent, community member, family member. So you may not be partner stuff, but you've got siblings, you've got a parent still alive, you've got, community member, employee, boss, like you've got all these roles, like girlfriend, right? In a bridal shower, you're trying to balance, right? You want to be good at, everyone I speak to wants to be good at all these things. The judgment's always, and then you throw a wrench in that, right? You throw a wrench in that, have a special needs child, parent that dies, partner with cancer, like life, like lose your job, friend who's going through a divorce, right? Like you just, that's life, right? And part of this question is like, how am I doing? It's not just about how do I give enough at my job, and I can always answer the 5 a.m. email. Self-care, fuck, now we've got to look after ourselves really well as well, right? The way I think about it, and I remembered answering this, and it was about the 5 things, and someone asked this question, a version of this question, but it was about like, she was about to have her first child and saying, how the hell do I be good at my job and be a good mother? And there's nothing I won't do to be a good mother, in the same way there's nothing I won't do to look after the health of my son, right? And the only thing I can say is, like, I always say, widen your aperture, right? And I remember thinking, first, there's some self-knowledge and self-awareness, cutting yourself some grace, but the widen your aperture thing, on any given day, I am good at probably 2 or 3 things: a good employee, a good mum, and maybe a good wife, let's say. The next day, I'm a really good community member, right? So I spent 2 hours at my kids' school board, right? On my kids' school board. Terrible mum, didn't put him to bed. Good girlfriend, because I went out to drinks with a girlfriend, right? If you look at yourself on any given day and judge yourself that you didn't do the 5 a.m. workout, or you didn't do the thing, you're doing yourself a disservice. And we're so hard on ourselves. And so I'm like, when I had kids, to me, it's like widen your aperture. On any given week, I'm pretty good at most things. Over a course of a month, I'm good. And then I'm over the course of a year. And the other things I would say, like guilt can actually be productive, right? It's not always bad. And this is the self-knowledge, right? There are sometimes I'm like, I'm guilty, like I'm not being good. And I look and I say, you know what? I've been out too much this week, the last 10 days. You know, I've been out too much this week. I haven't put my children to bed. Putting my children to bed is an important thing for me. Having dinner with my children is important. And I need to like calibrate. Let me look at my calendar and kill a couple of things, right? Convert dinners to lunch meetings, convert dinners to a weekend walk with a friend, right? So the first thing I would say to you is, are you looking and judging yourself in the moment? How are you doing over the course of a week and over the course of a month? And there's a tendency for women, I think, to be so judgmental about themselves. And it's one of the things that the growth mindset, replace that with curiosity. So when I feel guilty, I'm curious. My first thing is not judging myself, because fuck, I'm doing my, and the other thing I'm like, I'm doing my best and my best is good enough and I'm worthy. And that's my phrase. Like I'll have people, you know, I'm like, you're not, you know, you haven't replied to my email for a month. I'm like, I'm doing my best and I'm doing my best. And my phrase to myself is my best is good enough, because how can it be anything but? And sometimes I'm not doing my best. And I'm like, shit, I need to lean in a little here. Let me be honest with myself, right? So it's a long way round to saying foster curiosity. When you see these things pop up, I'm like, what's popping up for me? Am I really looking after my health? Am I really looking after my health? I had a herniated disc, an emergency disc blew up in my back January 7th last year. I went into emergency surgery. I was in agony. I'm doing great, right? I've had 6 years managing a herniated disc. Therapy, I didn't want surgery. I was like, it was a wake-up call. I'm like, Sarah, you are mortgaging your health with the level of stress you have. I believe it's showing. I showed it up in my disc, explosively blowing up my back. I won't let, and by the way, I was looking after myself. I was walking. I was like, I was like, not good enough. I'm not prepared to mortgage my health.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I was like, okay, I have to really relook at that. Am I really being honest with myself around that? And so part of what I'd say, go easy on yourself in the days, go think about the weeks with a little more, then really take a step back and say over the course of the last month, and there's things you can help to look at yourself, time blocks. Sometimes you like track your time for a month and saying, you know, when you haven't serviced your friendships, you know, when you haven't flown home to see a parent, you know. And so that judgment, flip the judgment to curiosity, going, oh, what is this telling me? What is about my judgment on myself? Do I need to pay more attention? Is it coming from a positive place of like, here's who I want to be in the world, versus the negative fixed mindset shit, which is about, you know, and you know what? Sometimes you just have to say, my husband and I said, enough. We're doing everything we can within reason for our child. He is loved. He is well looked after. And I've been doing that every day for the last 16 years, but enough on allergy appointment number 5, enough on number 7, experimental therapy. We got early intervention. It's like and then you kind of like, you know, and only my husband and I could come to that answer in this particular one. Only you can come to that answer. So it's like, you can talk it over with people, but there's a long way around to that. It's such a good question. And everyone's a work in progress on that. I'm constantly, my executive team, we talk about this, like how we setting conditions for the company executives, how we can set in conditions in our personal lives and our home lives, because we all want to be great leaders. We all want to be great in you know, everyone on my executive team happens to have children. We all want to be great parents. We want to be great community members. We want to show up every day in a mission, and we want our careers to be sustainable. And that's a lot of what we've worked so hard. And now it's like, and joyful, because guess what? Life's too hard. Like, you know, and so that's what we talk about our goals. And we talk very transparently, you know, every month we work on leadership together, and are we doing it for ourselves and we're doing it for each other? Like everything from operating manuals, like my team knows they do not call me between certain hours a day because I'm dropping my children to school, and I will not do calls in the car when my children are in the car. Like, I don't want to. It's 30 minutes. It's like 45 minutes. Don't call me between 7:45 and 8:30. I'm dropping my children at school, and it's really important to me. You can call me at 8:31. You can text me and say, emergency. I will always pick up an emergency call. And I do have those occasionally. And I know the operating manuals for all my executives. I know people who love to talk late at night. I know those who are happy to, they clear space. I'm like, you can call me. I'm walking Saturday and Sunday mornings. You can always call me on my walk. I'm so happy to talk about like stuff. But so all of that stuff, right? And so anyway, I won't keep banging on, but it's such a good question, and everyone's a work in progress on it, and it changes quarter to quarter, right?
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries.
And thank you, Jacqueline, for asking that. I really appreciate it too. I'm trying to, I mean, we sort of touched on this. So like, what does growth mindset mean to you, Sarah? And how do you apply it during your day or your work projects? And I love what you just said around on any given month, I'm good. And then I think you were going to say, but then you look at it at a year and I'm great. So just
great job on all of it, right? Like, again, and I'm sort of like, I'm doing my best. So how can you ask more of that, right? Like, I'm doing my best. Also high EQ and high self-awareness. I can hear it when my twin brother calls me and says, dude, you got to call dad, right? I'm not defensive. I'm like, oh shit. Oh yeah, you're right. Fuck yeah. You know, my dad lives in Australia. My family are all in Australia. Most of my family are in Australia, right? So here's the like, and I really thought about this, and I know I sent you some thoughts on this, and it got me thinking, because look, there's the obvious stuff about growth mindset, right? That everyone, it's like, to me, the way I think about it, how I translate it, it's hard to talk about growth mindset in a world that is deeply unequal and full of structural bias. Because I never want to send the signal. It's the Pollyanna kind of girl boss shit, which is like, if you just work harder, like we're not getting as far as we want as women, because we just not, we just, you know, because we have imposter syndrome and we just need to work harder. I mean, I just call BS on all of that, because structurally, it hasn't been a level playing field. And yet we still all work within that system. So for me, growth mindset, and this is where the nuance of it is really, and it's kind of a loaded conversation, because I never want to say, if you take agency, I want to have those conversations and also acknowledging the system's not fair, right? It isn't. But to me, the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset, and if you talk about so one is like this, the curiosity versus judgment is it sits at the center of so much for me, because, and what sits over all is taking agency. The growth mindset for me is you have agency over shit happens. There's a resiliency, or the things with growth mindset, like resiliency and all of those things, right? Is there's a healthiness and a self-awareness, and I also put a centeredness to it that I think is really important, because in a growth mindset, you come up against a problem and you're like, oh, you were trying to get something done. You're going to try and raise money and you don't get it raised, or you get 20 no's. The growth mindset is like, I have 20 data points. What's the learning from this? How do I take that learning in, get curious around what's not working, go talk to a couple of people, say, tear my pitch to pieces. Like, here's the people I met with. Like, what is the, like, and get centered, right? Which is like, I need to be able to hear that feedback. I need to be able to hear that learning, because if you don't change what you're doing, you're going to get another 20 no's, right? The fixed mindset is, and I talk to entrepreneurs all the time on this, and it's very hard, because knowledge, the fixed mindset is, well, the fixed mindset, some of it's also reality, right? Is they're not talking to me. They're not hearing me properly or giving me the same weight in a room because I'm a woman of color. Yeah, that's fucking true, right? All the data tells me that's true, but it doesn't change the fact you still need to raise money, right? Or the fixed mindset says, and that, I mean, it's like, I will never get there. This is about the world being unfair and not about the fact my pitch needs to be better quality. By the way, both those things can be true. But if you don't take the learning, you're not going to act on it in a way that gets you the outcome that you want. In this case, the effectiveness is raising money. It could be going and getting a promotion at work, right? You have a conversation with someone, says, you're not going to get, I observe these 3 things about your leadership that you need to fix until you get there. And maybe it's a douchebag white guy that's giving it to you. And he's practice microaggressions again. I mean, it could be a lot of reasons. By the way, I don't know if that doesn't mean you don't change. If you've got someone who's treating you poorly, you do not go. I mean, that doesn't mean you don't go and complain to them about HR. It doesn't mean you stack your decks. It doesn't mean you write everything down and be smart. But if this is the person who's going to give you a promotion, right? It's like, okay, what do you have to do differently? What's in your control? And also at the point, if you don't think there's enough things in your control to change it, how do you get out, right? And honestly, I acknowledge there's a lot of structural privilege in that, even the notion that someone has a choice to get out. So the curiosity versus judgment. And when these things happen, when bad things happen to you, you get treated badly, you get a no, you can't get something you want. The first thing I try and do, like we're so overdeveloped in our type A in judgment. The judgment is like, firstly, the first thing we do is we turn the lens in and we judge ourselves really badly. The first lens I see it with so many women, it all gets to things of not worthiness. I'm clearly not good enough. I clearly didn't do a good enough job. So part of it is just reframing that. Judgment to curiosity is like, the curious brain doesn't say I'm not good enough. The curious brain says, what did I not get? What did I not nail about this? Right? Curiosity about ourselves, right? Versus judgment. It's this, you can have the same data points and be looking at the same thing. It's just a different lens, right? Because the judgment, we double down on ourselves in ways that I just don't think are healthy for our psyche. And also they miss the learning, right? We just end up, we can miss the learning because it gets tied up in all these identity questions we have, is like, which we all have throughout careers. Am I worthy? Am I good enough? Am I an imposter? Am I all these things? The reality is sometimes a lot of the explanation, you are all those things. You are worthy. You are good enough. But sometimes you've gotten the work product wrong. Sometimes you've made a misjudgment. Sometimes you haven't got quite the skills that you need, right? And so that self-awareness, and it's just standing in your own two shoes in a really high esteem way is just all of our life work, right? And being able to separate when someone is giving you feedback to help you do your job, or telling you you've got learning that you need to make, it not letting you spiral into into identity stuff, which sends you into protective mode, right? Like all your best work gets done when you're psychologically safe. Fortunately, a lot of our workplaces are not that psychologically safe for otherwise voices. Sometimes you have to create that little bubble of psychological safety for yourself. And these are practices. You can do that. That doesn't mean people are absolved in your workplaces from creating that for you, but you will do better work. You will make better decisions for yourself from a point of real self-knowing and self-awareness, of personal psychological safety. And sometimes you've got to go, and I talk about therapy, coaching, feedback, support systems, girlfriends, like that. In those moments of centeredness, having capacity, we talk about it as an executive team, right? I will say to someone, can I give you some feedback right now? And someone says, I don't have capacity for that conversation right now. Our whole team was so low capacity the last 60 days of last year. And that just means we're so overwhelmed by the responsibilities of our jobs that I was like, I can't, I just, in some cases, I've got an exec who's dealing with I might have an exec who's dealing with a real personal problem. She don't have capacity to hear feedback right now. She's not going to hear it. And so we have a personal commitment in our exec team. If we have an issue with someone on the team or something we want to raise, we come to it within a week. And if we can't raise it with them in a week, it's because we're able to let it go. Someone said something in a meeting like, that really pissed me off, right? Or so we have that practice, right? But sometimes you can go to someone within a week and say, hey, can I raise something? I've got a frustration I want to raise with you right now. And if that person can say, I want to hear that, and I'm going to put a pin in it, and I need to come back to you when I have capacity. Because sometimes people are just having a shit day as well. And they can't hear feedback when their capacity is low. Getting centered is another first. Focus on your own capacity. Sometimes that's health and self-care. Sometimes that's boundaries, right? You just need boundaries. Sometimes there's people who are toxic to your work and you're going to need to put a boundary around them with HR. It's like, I don't want to deal with that person, right? I need to remove myself from reporting to someone. That's a real clear boundary, right? Or I'm going to leave because you judge that there's, what you can control. So the getting centered foster self-awareness is like healthy capacity to do the work, and life constructors. Curiosity versus judgment. if you're low capacity and you're in a judgment space and you're hard on yourself, you can take yourself into protective space, right? And it's very hard to do anything good from a protective space. I understand, I've been there, right? You have stories in your head about stuff that's going on that often isn't what's going on, because you're looking at it through the lens of like, I'm not worthy, I'm not low esteem moments. And we've all had them. The most successful women have them. They honestly do. And why this is linked to a growth mindset, I said, you can't be resilient without being centered, having high self-awareness, going easy on yourself. And you can't, it's hard to have agency and to feel like an agent in your own career. And that to me is what having a growth mindset around. Just acknowledging there's a lot of first forces that are trying to strip that agency away from you. So that to me is partly I like the way I think about the lens of growth mindset, right? Versus fixed, because the fixed mindset is a protective person. There's no growth in a fixed mindset. And a lot of things can push you in a protective space in a workplace. I've been in protective spaces for chunks of my career, for very good reason, by the way, because it wasn't safe, right? And then I think part of this is understanding, growth mindset is solving hard problems. It's resiliency. And you got to have some energy sources for that, right? Who and what are your energy sources? Like energy sources is my energy source is some of the work I do, visioning work, laying out goals, because I know my Enneagram. I've got a high self-awareness. What's my Enneagram? What's my type? What are the things activities that and I have to do that work sometimes, but I know when I have to do it, right? But what are my energy sources? Spending time with colleagues, spending time with across our org. Like I get a lot of energy from getting to know the people I work with. I've got a real high affiliation. It gives me a lot of energy, right? For my work. It means I'm better off. I have more capacity to solve a lot of problems. If all I'm in is firefighting and problem solving, and as a CEO, the chief problem solver for 150 people, it's wearing, right? And I got to manage stakeholders, and I actually find that really energizing, right? But my sources of energy are walking with my dog, being out in nature. If I don't do that 4 or 5 hours a week, I'm not very good, right? And so tell you, that's apparent when I'm like giving myself permission to get up and go for a walk in COVID every day for an hour. I always thought, God, that's an hour I'm not with my children in the mornings and evenings. That's precious time to be with my children. I was like, no, I need that capacity. I need it, right? And then can be lots of sources of motivation and capacity and energy, right? And resilience, right? I got my phone of friends. I need people I got my girlfriends that I can just call, and I'm like, you don't have enough context to solve any of these problems for me. My husband's amazing at this too. I'm like, I literally say, you cannot solve any of these problems for me, but I literally need to vent to you for 15 minutes about something. I need to channel, and I need you to hold that. And I do that for my colleagues too. We have venting space that's safe space. You can vent to me. I'm not going to try and solve it. I'm not going to think you're anything less because you can't handle it. You just can vent, and we name those spaces about, and then you're like, okay, that feels a lot better. And now I can go out and solve the problem, right? So that's so personal is the other thing I want to say. And so and this is why the self-awareness is so important about who you are and what, and I say a lot of this is just paying curiosity, paying attention in your workday, what gives you energy and what sucks the living daylights out of you. And some of my job that I have to do, I'm responsible, does suck the daylights out of me. I feel satisfied when I do it. It doesn't mean I can't avoid it, but I know when I need to do that work. I have time block in the afternoon because I'm better off in the afternoons of doing that work, right? Or whatever it is, right? I've hired people who are good at that stuff, right? You don't always have that as an individual contributor. And then I always say, like in a growth mindset, you cannot offer this to others. Like we take responsibility. I'm always like, leadership isn't something that's given to you and you're the receiver of it. In any organization, you are also responsible for condition setting for everyone around you, right? Even when you're junior, in the most junior roles, you take responsibility for both. And I think I see a lot of early career people are like, I'm waiting for everyone in our company. I'm like 140 people. We all set the culture together. We all set the tone. If we want to create a place that's truly welcoming, and we are truly an inclusive workplace, what are you doing to make sure people who look, act, judge different styles to you, what are you making sure, what are you doing to make them feel included? Right. And again, I don't lay that responsibility on them, but I always think like the growth mindset is 100% responsibility. Like I have agency. Even if I am in my first 6 months in a job, I have agency in setting the tone in my work environment, because you do. Jess on my desk, she's really experienced. She's awesome. She sets the tone for my office in the way she handles phone calls, in the way people come to her. I'm like, you are an extension of me. She has a ton of responsibility, right? And she embraces that, and she's awesome, right? Like she's like, she led the whole program, designed all of our leadership offsites last year, because she's taken that. And I'm like, she created the greatest like team days across the country. She did the whole thing, right? Because she is like, I have a sense of how you're trying to build the culture, and I want to be part of it, right? And so anyway, none of these you'll ever see on growth mindset like charts, but they're directly linked to me in terms just from the lens of an individual. Like, what can you do? Because it's one thing to say, show up with this resiliency and show up with problem solving. It's really hard to do that consistently because you're worn down, right? And then you've got to be good at the technical skills you need for your job. You got to like deal with shitty people and shitty colleagues sometimes. You've got to deal with, workplaces where there has and continues to be a lot of structural bias against women, and just really acknowledging, as a white woman, you have it off so much better than disabled women of color, like, everything, right? So what responsibilities do you have as a white woman in your workplaces as well? And so anyway, I'll stop talking there for a minute because I want to hear any questions.
Yeah, I do want to open it up for questions.
Only running out of time. Sorry, I was banging on.
No, that's okay. Let's try to grab one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one.
Oh,
I like how you've been through like a lot of different positions and companies throughout your career. And I was just sort of wondering, as someone who's like, I feel like I graduated from college in 2020. So I'm like at the beginning.
Yeah.
When do you feel like it's time and you're ready to like move on from something? Like, when do you feel that shift of like, you've done as much as you can somewhere and it's time to go somewhere else? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, it's such a personal, here's what I would say. I always think there's currencies in any role and any point of your career. Salary, prestige, right? Like learning, the type of work you're doing, right? Because the learning could be general, the type of work you're doing. And I always think whether there's a mentor sponsorship part to it, because you can learn a lot from shitty people as well who don't sponsor you. You have to be clear, and I'm explicit about it when I go into different roles, right? What's most important for me right now, right? One is like, fuck, I just need a paycheck for 6 months. Like sometimes you're at that point and you want to minimize the shittiness of it, but just be clear about that. And then you're going into that and you're trying to find something. So it's always about, okay, let me just name what's most important for me at this point in my career right now. I encourage you to foster on learning and good environments with good people that you're going to learn from. Minimize prestige. Everyone is just like this prestige thing. And where you have a running start, you can be successful in the job. Because a little bit of success, if it's too much of a stretch thing and you turk yourself into a role that you can't fucking do, it's just demoralizing, right? And then rethink that every 6 months, even when you have in a good role. It's like, has this company earned the right to have me in the next? Is it still map up against the currencies that are important to me in the next 6 months, right? Because those will change for you at points in time. Earlier in your career, you tend to not have children you have to support. You might have loans you have to pay back, but you tend to like, you can live cheaply, like you don't, and risk, if you want to take risk. The other one is equity, risk, and currency and upside. And that's a mentality. Some people are very happy taking a lot of risk. I'm a risk taker. I took a risk and I kept my costs low early in my career because I wanted to be free to like explore that. It's so personal, but being explicit for you right now, going, okay, let me assess what are the currencies that I think are important to me in the next 12 to 18 months? How's this job doing against those currencies? The type of role I'm doing, how I feel going to work every day. Do I work with decent people and I'm proud of? My salary and everything else. I think sometimes people can talk about like, I want to earn another 10 grand. And then you look at like, I've got an amazing boss who's a mentor. I've got these things. I'm actually learning a ton. I really encourage and being really clear, and also just being clear about the motivation. Sometimes people are like, you know what? I want a prestige name on my resume and I'm going to put up with a lot of other shit to get it. Just name it, own it, go get that prestige for 18 months and tolerate it. But be clear about why you went into something and why you're accepting something, knowing that's going to change every, you know, you've got 10 to 12 5-year careers and 20 to 25 2.5-year careers, stages of your career. Like, it's a long road. I worry sometimes early career people, like, they're just not clear on why they're doing something. And there's a lot of implicit things. And sometimes they're working through what their parents are still, and what I should do with my degree. What are my shoulds?
Yeah.
So step back and say, with agency, how do I want to author the next 2 years? What's important to me? And look at it through the lens. And then you take it away from judgment around like immediacy for curiosity. Go, oh, could I get this job to line up more with what's important to me? And then you feel more in control of, like, you are architecting a roadmap for your career. Don't be it's fine to go get 2 or 3 of those things in every 2.5-year block. You're not going to get all 5 for a while, right? And you can put up with a lower salary if it's getting you real learning, but then be honest about yourself. If you're getting if you're getting a low salary, but you've been treated like shit and you're not learning anything, go find something else. But then be clear, what am I going to prioritize, right? People take on that prestige role for a toxic boss. And again, you might be just like, you know what, I can stick it out for a year because I want that prestige thing on my resume and it's going to help me get to the next thing. Just front foot the roadmap of it. And you know, it also just feels better when you're managing towards your own strategic narrative. Even though you don't have a lot of agency, you still got to go find a job and get a job, and it's fucking hard. And your first few jobs are the hardest. They really are. So and then, by the way, you will show up to an employer. You will do much better in an interview because you've got a clear narrative about why you want that role. I'm prioritizing learning, why, and please do your research on job interviews. The number of times early career people, they haven't done the basics in preparing for interviews. Do your research. And if you want the job at the end of the interview, please ask for the job. Say, I want to be clear. I really want this job. I really want this job. The number of people who afterwards, who tell me they wanted a job, and I'm like, you didn't even say you wanted it. Like, ask for the job you want. Say how much you want it, because attitude and the growth mindset things, and a growth mindset, people have agency, initiative. Don't do it. Just say, you know, don't, it's just the simplest things. People skip over the simplest things, right?
And it's so funny to hear you just say, like, ask for the job you want. Because when you said it, everything in me was like, no, you can't do that.
No, if you're interviewing for a job, tell them you want the job.
Yeah.
Right. The last thing, it's a two-way thing in an interview. The last thing someone wants to do is offer to someone who they think is lukewarm about it.
Yeah.
You don't want to play too hard to get, but don't say you want the job if you don't, right? But the number one thing to do if you interview for something, to say and be very clear about why, right? It's not just I'm blowing smoke at you. And you know, I look at Hello Sunshine, I want the job because I believe in the mission, right? Everyone I interview believes in the mission. It's not a differentiating thing enough. Say, I want this job and I'm bringing this is fully aligned with where I want to be in my career. Here's what I will bring to it. Like, I will bring this attitude. I will learn. And if you have done the work and thinking about why you want this for the next phase of career, you don't have to say the words. I will sense, a good interviewer will sense that. They're like, wow, they've got a head on their shoulders, this person. No one's expecting you to know it all in your first 2 or 3 jobs. They expect to train you. What they want to know is, can you receive that training? Do you have a healthy sense of, do you have a work ethic? Do you have a work ethic? Do you have a centeredness about you that can receive learning and feedback and not going to play games or escape accountability or like that? Do they have a healthy sense of who they are and what they can contribute to it? So just demonstrate you understand that. But a number of times people do that and they don't even, I was like, fuck, I've called people up and said, do you want this job? Because I'm also like practicing having people interview better as women. Just guys do it much more often in my experience. They really do. And again, it's not asking for a job you're not interviewing for. It's not even asking. Don't ask for the job. Tell them how much you want it. Right? Because that's signaling to me like every hire is a risk. And the worst thing is hiring people that aren't a fit. And fit, the number one thing for fit is just people who really want to be there and have a growth mindset, internal motivation, internal compass. They'll run through fires for you.
Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your wisdom. I'm just being mindful of time here. So we will let you go. We've taken up more than an hour here, but we really appreciate you. And thank you all for asking such great questions. I've learned so much. Hopefully you have as well.
Sorry, I didn't get to more questions. I should have been shorter in my answers, but I really appreciate the very thoughtful ones that I do get.
Yes, no, I think you covered it all. So thank you.
Time flew by. Thanks all.
I know.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
great week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.